as if you were moving inside a carefully staged scene you didn't consciously choose. That uneasy sense that something is repeating, that the same emotional notes keep playing no matter how much you change the melody. Different people, different places, the same inner outcome. This is not coincidence. This is structure. Most people believe they live in reality. They don't. They live inside an interpretation. What you call my life is a psychological film projected through memory, conditioning, fear, desire, and unexamined pain. You do not meet the world as it is. You meet it as you are, and that distinction changes everything. From early childhood, your mind learned how to survive. It learned what to suppress, what to exaggerate, what to fear, and what to chase. Those decisions did not disappear. They became the invisible architecture of your perception. Every reaction you have today is filtered through that old internal logic. The result is a life that feels real, urgent, personal, yet strangely repetitive, like a dream that keeps looping. You think you are reacting to people, situations, failures, betrayals, but in truth those are only triggers. The real script is already written inside you. Your unconscious mind does not speak in words, it speaks in patterns, and when a pattern is ignored it repeats, louder, sharper, more painful. This is why insight alone rarely changes anything. You can read books, watch videos, meditate, relocate, reinvent yourself, and still find the same emotional gravity pulling you back, because the projector is still running. You keep changing the screen, not the source. Here is the unsettling truth. You are not a passive character in this story. You are the author, the director, and the actor. And you forgot. Forgetting was part of the script, because if you remembered too early, the lesson would never complete itself. Life keeps presenting you with scenes designed to confront what you avoid. Rejection mirrors inner rejection. Conflict mirrors inner division. Emptiness mirrors a disconnection from something you refuse to feel. Nothing here is random. Nothing is personal. Everything is precise. This film is not here to comfort you. It is here to make you notice, to slow down the projector just enough for you to glimpse it. Because the moment you recognize that you are inside a psychological construction, something subtle shifts. You stop asking why this keeps happening to me and start asking what in me is, asking to be seen. This is where awakening begins, not with answers but with discomfort, with the courage to stay present instead of escaping. Because the dream does not end when you run from it. It ends when you look directly at how it is made. Have you ever felt that your life is not really happening to you, but through you? You have felt it before. That strange sense of emotional déjà vu. The moment when a situation hurts in a way that feels disturbingly familiar. As if you have already lived this scene, cried this cry, lost this exact battle. This repetition is not coincidence and it is not fate. It is the language of the unconscious. The mind does not speak in sentences, it speaks in patterns. When something inside you remains unseen, unresolved or denied, it does not disappear. It waits. And when the time is right, it recreates itself in the outer world, wearing a new face, a new name, a new story, but carrying the same emotional core. You think life is attacking you again, but in truth you are meeting the same inner fragment, knocking on the door once more. This is why changing cities does not save you, why changing partners does not heal you, why even changing beliefs often fails. You keep repainting the stage while the script remains untouched. The unconscious is not cruel, but it is relentless. It will replay the scene until you finally stop, watching the screen and turn around, to face the projector. Most people never do. They call it bad luck, toxic people, unfair systems, broken society. These explanations feel comforting because they protect the ego from responsibility. But responsibility here does not mean blame, it means authorship. You are not guilty for what was written when you were unconscious, but you are responsible for becoming conscious of it. Every trigger is a clue. Every emotional overreaction is a fingerprint left by something unfinished. When someone's words cut deeper than they should, when rejection feels like annihilation, when silence feels like abandonment, the pain is older than the moment. The present situation merely opens a door that was already unlocked. Until you walk through it willingly, life will keep pushing you toward it with increasing force. This is why suffering intensifies when ignored. Not because you deserve it, but because the psyche demands recognition. Awakening does not begin with peace. It begins with discomfort, with the unsettling realization that the enemy you have been fighting outside has been living inside all along. And once you see this, truly see it, repetition loses its power. The scene cannot play the same way when the author steps back onto the stage. At some point, if you stay with this long enough, a terrifying question begins to form. If my suffering is not caused by the world, then who am I without it? This is where most people turn back. Because pain, as destructive as it is, gives structure. It gives identity. It gives a story. The victim knows who they are. The struggler knows their role. Even the angry one knows what fuels them. But when you remove the narrative that says, this is happening to me, something collapses, you are left with an open space where certainty used to live. The ego hates this space. It experiences it as death. That is why awakening feels like loss before it feels like freedom. You are not losing your life. You are losing the character you mistook for yourself. The unconscious resists this violently. It will flood you with doubt, distraction, spiritual bypassing, even false clarity. It will whisper that you are already healed, already awakened, already beyond this. But true transformation is quiet. It does not announce itself. It dismantles you slowly, layer by layer, until nothing false remains intact. Jung warned that enlightenment without shadow integration is inflation, a spiritual mask worn by the ego to survive its own exposure. This is why people who chase constant positivity often become brittle, judgmental, detached from reality. They have climbed upward without ever descending. But descent is unavoidable. The descent is where the gold is buried. To descend means to stay present with discomfort without explaining it away, to feel fear without creating an enemy, to feel emptiness without rushing to fill it. This is not passive suffering. It is active witnessing, and something strange happens when you do this long enough. The pain begins to loosen, not because it is fought, but because it is finally allowed to speak. You realize that much of what you called pain was resistance to pain. Much of what you called fear was fear of feeling fear. When the observer remains steady, the sensations move. They rise, peak, and fall like waves. You begin to see that you are not the storm. You are the sky that contains it. This realization does not make life perfect. It makes it honest. And honesty is far more stabilizing than illusion. The moment you stop demanding that reality protect your identity, reality begins to reveal itself without distortion. This is the threshold. Not bliss, not transcendence, but responsibility for consciousness itself. Once this threshold is crossed, something subtle but irreversible shifts. You stop asking how to escape your life and begin asking how you have been participating in it. Responsibility no longer feels like blame. It feels like authorship. You start noticing that every reaction you have is not forced upon you by the world but chosen, often unconsciously, as a way to protect a fragile identity. Anger protects the wounded self. Withdrawal protects the fearful self. Perfectionism protects the ashamed self. These patterns were never mistakes. They were strategies. They kept you alive when you did not know how to feel safely, but what once protected you now confines you. Jung described this as the moment when the adaptation becomes the prison. And here is the paradox. The mind wants liberation without surrender. It wants control without responsibility. It wants peace without feeling pain. But consciousness does not work that way. Growth is not additive. It is subtractive. You do not become more. You become less false. As these defenses soften, you may feel exposed, raw, strangely quiet. The noise of constant inner commentary begins to fade. You notice pauses between thoughts. Not forced silence, but natural gaps. In those gaps, something watches without judging. This watcher does not rush to fix, explain, or improve. It simply notices. This is not dissociation. It is presence. And presence changes everything, because it removes the urgency that once drove your suffering. You stop needing to be someone. You start allowing yourself to be here. Emotions still arise, but they no longer define you. Fear becomes sensation. Sadness becomes movement. Joy becomes warmth rather than identity. This is where real stability begins. Not from control, but from intimacy with experience. Life no longer feels like a problem to solve. It feels like a process unfolding. And yet this stage carries its own danger. The ego may claim this witnessing as an achievement. It may say, I am awakened now. That is the trap. The moment you identify with the observer, it becomes another mask. True awareness is anonymous. It does not announce itself. It does not need validation. It does not argue. It simply remains. When this is understood, even the desire to be free loosens its grip. You realize freedom was never elsewhere. It was buried beneath the compulsion to escape. At this stage, the struggle no longer looks dramatic from the outside, but internally it is profound. The mind begins to realize that most of its suffering came not from pain itself, but from resistance to pain. You see clearly now that every time discomfort appeared, the mind rushed to label it, judge it, escape it, or transform it into a story about who you are. But when observation deepens, something unexpected happens. Pain is allowed to exist without being personalized. It is felt fully, but it is no longer interpreted as failure, weakness, or meaning. This is where many people turn back, because this phase offers no excitement, no grand revelation, no identity upgrade. It feels ordinary, and the ego despises ordinariness. It wants drama, it wants transcendence, it wants to be special. But consciousness matures in simplicity. You start noticing that life does not require you to fix yourself before participating in it. You can act while uncertain. You can speak while afraid. You can love while imperfect. The idea that you must resolve yourself before living quietly dissolves. Jung spoke of this as individuation, not as perfection, but as wholeness. Wholeness includes contradiction, strength and vulnerability, clarity and confusion, light and shadow. You no longer attempt to eliminate inner conflict. You learn to hold it. And paradoxically, this holding weakens its grip. The nervous system settles. The constant anticipation of threat fades. You respond rather than react. Silence becomes comfortable. Loneliness transforms into solitude. You stop demanding that the world confirm your worth. You stop demanding that others understand you. You start meeting reality as it is, not as it should be. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Your actions become quieter but more effective. You say no without aggression. You say yes without self-betrayal. And when suffering arises, as it inevitably will, it is no longer interpreted as a sign that something is wrong. It is seen as part of movement, part of being alive. At this point, the question is no longer, how do I escape my life? The question becomes, how do I stay present without closing? And staying present becomes the practice, again and again, without ambition, without image, without needing an endpoint. At some point along this path, a subtle but radical shift occurs. You stop trying to understand yourself conceptually and begin to experience yourself directly. Thoughts still arise, emotions still move through you, but they are no longer treated as instructions. They are events, not commands. This is where the illusion of control finally weakens. You realize that most of what you called control was actually tension, a constant tightening around outcomes, identities, and expectations. Letting go of that tension does not make you careless. It makes you available. Available to reality as it unfolds, rather than to the mental rehearsal of how it should unfold. Jung described this moment as the ego stepping back to allow the self to emerge, not as a mystical entity, but as a deeper organizing intelligence that does not shout, it whispers. You begin to notice intuition operating beneath thought, guiding decisions without drama. Choices feel quieter yet more certain. You are less reactive to praise and less devastated by criticism, because neither defines you anymore. The hunger to be seen weakens. The fear of being misunderstood loosens. You no longer build your life around defending a fragile self-image. And with that, relationships change. You stop unconsciously demanding that others complete you, heal you, or validate you. You meet them as they are, not as symbols in your inner story. Conflict still happens, but it is no longer fueled by the need to protect an identity. It becomes informational, not personal. The body reflects this shift. Breathing deepens. The jaw unclenches. Sleep improves. There is more space between impulse and action. You begin to sense that peace is not something you achieve by arranging your life correctly, but something that emerges when you stop resisting life incorrectly. This does not mean you withdraw from ambition or responsibility. It means your actions are no longer driven by fear of insufficiency. You work because you choose to, not because you are trying to prove your worth. And perhaps most unsettling of all, you discover that the version of you that suffered the most was never broken. It was simply unheard. As attention turns inward without judgment, that part softens. The need to fight yourself dissolves. Life does not become easy, but it becomes honest. And honesty, more than comfort, is what stabilizes the psyche over time. Eventually you arrive at a realization that feels almost disappointing in its simplicity. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no final revelation, no permanent state of bliss. No moment where life suddenly becomes effortless. What changes is subtler and far more durable. You stop asking the world to confirm who you are. You stop chasing experiences that promise transformation and instead begin to notice the transformation that happens when nothing is chased at all. The mind, which once felt like a battlefield, becomes more like weather. Thoughts pass, emotions arise, sensations fluctuate, but none of them require immediate reaction. You learn to stay, to remain present even when discomfort appears, without reaching for distraction or explanation. This is where most people turn back. Staying with discomfort feels like failure to a culture obsessed with optimization and relief. But this staying is the work. Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, but grows in power. What you allow, however, integrates. You begin to see that many of your fears were not enemies, but signals, pointing toward parts of yourself that wanted recognition rather than elimination. Anxiety loses its urgency when it is no longer treated as a threat. Sadness softens when it is not judged as weakness. Even anger, when observed without acting it out, reveals its original purpose as a boundary, not a weapon. As this understanding deepens, life becomes less about control and more about alignment. You are no longer forcing yourself into roles that contradict your nature. You say no without justification. You say yes without overthinking. There is a growing trust in your internal rhythm, a sense that you do not need to rush to keep up with an imagined timeline. The compulsion to compare fades because comparison requires a fixed identity, and you no longer cling to one. You begin to live from a place that feels internally coherent, even when externally uncertain. And here is the paradox. The less you try to become someone, the more fully you inhabit being someone, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. This is not enlightenment as escape. This is maturity, a grounded presence that can hold joy without clinging and pain without collapsing. The world does not change, but your relationship to it does. And that changes everything quietly, steadily, without spectacle.